The night they came for me, everything changed. The sharp knock on the door echoed like a thunderclap in the quiet of our home, tearing through the peace and marking the beginning of a nightmare. My heart sank as I opened the door to find the grim faces of police officers, their presence a dark omen in the stillness of the night. As they uttered the words, "You're under arrest," a chasm opened beneath me, swallowing the future I had envisioned. How could I explain this to her, to them? The ride to the station was a blur, each turn of the wheels a step further from the life I knew, from the people I loved. Not long ago, my life was a balancing act of hopes and responsibilities. As a high school senior on the cusp of adulthood, I poured every ounce of my energy into securing a college scholarship. Coming from a lower-class family, education was my golden ticket, a chance to lift my family out of the perpetual cycle of hardship. Home was a cramped but loving space I shared with my parents, my 10-year-old brother, and the specter of my mother's heart disease. Our family restaurant, a small but vibrant hub of activity. After school, I would swap books for aprons, helping out in any way I could. It was hard, exhausting work, but it was fueled by family pride and the joy of serving our little community. My brother, a lively 10-year-old with hero worship for me, was a constant source of motivation. Seeing the admiration in his eyes, I knew I couldn't let him down. Amidst these everyday struggles, I found solace in my high school sweetheart, a bright and ambitious girl. Together, we dreamed of scholarships and colleges, of a future where our current struggles were just memories. But life, as it often does, had other plans. Our routine was a delicate structure built on the assumption of tomorrow, unaware of how quickly everything could change. My father, the pillar of our family and the heart of the restaurant, fell ill with what we thought was just a fever. It was a common enough ailment, dismissed with the hope of a speedy recovery. The next morning, duty bound and steadfast, he went to work, only to collapse hours later. The call came out of nowhere, a sharp, jarring ring that cut through the monotony of a day filled with textbooks and future plans. My heart pounded as I answered, the voice on the other end urgent, pulling me away from the safety of routine and into the unknown. Rushing to the hospital, my mind was a whirlwind of fear and confusion. What I found was my father, a man who had always been an unyielding pillar of strength, now lying frail and diminished on a hospital bed. His eyes, though clouded with pain, locked onto mine with an intensity that rooted me to the spot. With a trembling hand, he passed me the keys to the restaurant, the metal cold and alien against my skin. "You are the man of the house now," he said, his voice a mere whisper, but laden with an enormity that crushed me. It wasn't just a passing of duties. It was a transfer of lifetimes, of hopes and dreams. I was no longer just his child. I was his successor, the new pillar on which my family would lean. As dawn unfurled its light across the sky, a silence preceded the storm of emotions about to engulf us. The doctor's steps were measured, his demeanor somber as he approached us with the gravity of a man bearing the world's sorrows. "I'm sorry, but your father has passed away," he announced, shattering the fragile hope that had kept us anchored through the night. My mother, her strength waning not just from the ordeal of my father's loss, but also from her own battle with heart disease, seemed to crumble from within. My brother, too young to fully comprehend the depth of our loss, looked on with a mix of confusion and dawning realization. His innocence, a fragile bubble, was burst by the sharp edge of reality. We later learned that it was COVID-19 that had claimed my father, the cornerstone of our existence. As the reality of our situation settled in, a mix of fear, anger, and an overwhelming sense of responsibility consumed me. How could I protect and provide for my family in a world that had suddenly become so unpredictable and hostile? The thought of sacrificing my dream of a scholarship, my ticket out of our struggles, added another layer of turmoil to my already burdened heart. In the days that followed, the restaurant closed its doors, a casualty of the restrictions put in place to curb the virus's spread. Our main source of income gone, we found ourselves relying on the dwindling savings left behind by my father and the sporadic support of the community. My dreams of scholarships and college faded into the background, overshadowed by the immediate need to support my family. My high school sweetheart, a constant presence by my side, offered her support in the only way she knew how, but even her presence couldn't shield me from the overwhelming sense of responsibility that now defined my existence. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges and the shadow of loss, but I knew I had no choice but to face it head on for my family, for my future, and for the memory of my father. The dawn of responsibility had risen, and I felt it in every part of my being. Work became not just a necessity, but a lifeline. Jobs, side gigs, anything that paid, I took without hesitation, all while the blue light from my laptop screen burned late into the night, a silent witness to my struggle with online classes and looming exams. Our neighborhood was never a stranger to hard times, but now, with the suffocating grip of the pandemic, it felt as if we were all a few missteps away from the wrong side of the law. It was during one of these side jobs that I bumped into an old friend, or rather what was left of him. He spoke of easy money, of the thrill of taking from the rich, those who wouldn't even notice a few missing trinkets. "We're the Robin Hoods of our time," he said, a twisted smile on his face as he tried to pull me into the fold. But the very thought curdled my stomach. My father's voice echoed in my head, a remnant of better times, reminding me of the values he instilled in me. I couldn't and wouldn't let that legacy be tainted. Scholarship applications sat in a stack on the corner of my desk, each filled with the promise of a future that was slowly slipping through my fingers like grains of sand. In the end, my scholarship dreams were dashed. The email sat in my inbox, a polite but firm rejection that might as well have been a punch to the gut. It said my academic performance was commendable, but it was clear the committee could sense my focus had been divided. Meanwhile, my girlfriend's acceptance letter arrived like a beacon in the dark. I was proud of her, truly, but it stung. She was moving forward, her path unencumbered, while I felt anchored in place by 1,000 invisible weights. But there was no time to dwell on what could have been. My family needed me. Life's disparity became most palpable when I took on a job at a sprawling estate on the outskirts of town. The lawn stretched out like a green sea, and the house, a mansion really. As I trimmed the edges and mowed the grass, I couldn't help but wonder about the lives of those who lived behind those walls. What would it be like to worry about grades and not groceries? And to think about prom dates instead of power bills. It was during one of these jobs that temptation crept up on me like a shadow at dusk. I was in the hall office of the wealthy homeowner, a room larger than our entire living room, waiting to get paid for the day's work. That's when I saw it. The vault cracked open, a sliver of opportunity that whispered seductively of a solution to all my problems. Inside, stacks of bills lay casually, a small fortune that could change everything for us. My friend's words returned to me then, a siren's call. It's not really stealing, it's survival. I stood there, caught between desperation and integrity, the line between them blurring. But as I reached out, a flash of my father's face halted me. His disappointment, his sorrow from beyond the grave. I withdrew my hand as if burned, my heart racing with a cocktail of fear and relief. The homeowner returned then, unaware of the silent battle that had just waged in his office. He handed me the payment, a little more than usual, praising my work. "You're a good kid, Michael," he said, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "We need more like you." His words, meant as a compliment, were a knife to my conscience. He promised more work, and as he walked me out, I realized I had passed a test I never wanted to take. That evening, I recounted the bills and tucked them safely into my mother's purse. I fell asleep immediately out of exhaustion. Walking to the school to pick up my brother had become a part of the routine, a small pocket of normalcy in our upended world. But then, one day, a moment shattered my composure. There stood my little brother, a living reminder of my duties and dreams, visibly set apart from his peers. His clothes, worn and slightly tattered, silently narrated a tale of our struggles, a burden no child should bear. In stark contrast, his classmates were clad in fresh, pristine uniforms, their laughter and effortless conversations highlighting the disparity. My heart clenched at the sight, a pang of sorrow and guilt cutting through me. It's one thing to understand your family's struggles intellectually, but to see its impact so visibly on my brother was something else entirely. Throughout the day, the image of my brother among his peers haunted me. It brought back my own childhood memories, the internal promise to myself that things would be different for my own brother. Yet here we were, history repeating itself in the cruelest of ways. I had to find a way to make things better. The weight of the day pressed down on me as night fell. I found myself reaching for the phone, the numbers of my old friend, now a harbinger of the dark path, dialing almost of their own accord. My voice was a stranger's as I spoke. The words tasting like ash in my mouth. There was a plan, he said, a quick in and out at a wealthy man's vacation home. Rich pickings for those with the guts to take it. We met in the shadowed confines of his rundown house, a den of desperation masquerading as opportunity. My heart pounded against my ribs, fear and adrenaline in equal measure coursing through my veins. The night was a blur of whispered footsteps, of muffled commands, and the steady thump of my own heartbeat in my ears. And then, it was done. We stood with the spoils of our transgression, a sum of money that could soothe the immediate pangs of our hardship. The guilt was there, a gnawing creature in my gut, but it was overshadowed by the sight of my brother's face when I handed him new clothes, by the relief in my mother's eyes as she held the medicine, by the first full meal we sat down to in months. But the path once taken is hard to forsake. One robbery turned to two, and two turned to more. The guilt that was once a screaming siren became a whisper, then a ghost. I told myself it was for them, for my family, but with each night's work, I recognized myself less and less in the mirror. I was becoming the very shadow I had vowed never to cast, the antithesis of the man my father hoped I would be. One night, the air was different, the darkness more oppressive, the silence a foreboding omen. We slipped through the shadows towards another score, the ease of routine dulling the sharp edge of risk. But luck, it seems, had grown tired of our games. The blue flash of police lights shattered the night, the wail of sirens ripping through the silence. Our breaths became ragged, our movements frantic. We scattered like leaves in a storm, the promise of freedom fueling our desperate strides. That night, hiding in the brush, my heart pounding a desperate rhythm against my ribs, I came face to face with the stark reality of what I had become. It was as if I could see my mother's tear-streaked face, hear my brother's voice laced with betrayal, feel the heavy disappointment of my father, watching from beyond. I made it home under the cloak of darkness, the first light of dawn, a horizon of hope. As I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling, the silence was not empty. It was filled with the echoes of what could have been. I made a vow there in the stillness, a promise that this night would mark the end of my foray into the criminal world. Time, it seemed, was on my side. The world was beginning to stir from its forced slumber as COVID restrictions lifted, and whispers of normalcy began to circulate through the streets. The restaurant could open its doors once more. It would be slow, it would be challenging, but it would be honest. Mom and I donned our aprons again, and as I looked at my mother and brother working alongside me, I knew that no amount of easy money could ever replace the pride I felt at that moment. The night had settled like a soft shroud over our weary home, the moon a silent sentinel in the sky. That's when the knock came, a sharp, insistent rapping that tore through the stillness of the night. The sound was foreign, out of place in time. We exchanged glances, a family's silent conversation of concern. I approached the door. The locking came again, more urgent this time. When I finally swung the door open, the harsh glare of flashlights struck me blind, and shadows clad in police uniforms burst through the threshold of our sanctuary. "You're under arrest," came the curt announcement. The officer's words seemed to hang. I stood motionless as they spilled out the accusations in a torrent. Behind me, a gasp cut through the air, a sound of a mother's heart breaking. My brother, wide-eyed, was a silent statue. In that moment, as I was led away in handcuffs, the night was no longer quiet, and the darkness no longer a blanket under which we could hide. The drive to the station was a blur, the back seat of the patrol car a cold, lonely cage. The detective laid it out for me. An old friend, caught in a raid, had traded my freedom for his. He had painted me as the mastermind, his words a betrayal that cut deeper than the steel of the handcuffs. I sat in the interrogation room, the weight of my mother's heart condition and my brother's adoration crushing me. How could I have been so selfish, so short-sighted? I had risked everything for a quick fix, and now the cost was clear. The stark walls of the holding cell were indifferent to the turmoil within me. The bail amount set for my release might as well have been a king's ransom, an unattainable figure that sealed my fate. I had no means to pay it, no secret stash or hidden assets, only the weight of my actions and the heavy currency of regret. Now, I was supposed to be in college, navigating the path of higher education, alongside my high school sweetheart. Instead of walking the campus with her, I was pacing the confines of a jail cell. I faced the hardest truth of all. In trying not to lose everything, I had lost the most important parts of myself. In the dim light of my cell, the monotony was broken abruptly one evening by a call that seemed as out of place as a whisper in a storm. "Pack your stuff," they said, the words hanging in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. My heart raced, a flurry of questions cascading through my mind. What's happening? Why now? As I gathered the sparse belongings that marked my time in this place, confusion and anticipation warred within me. The thought that perhaps my mom had found the means to pay my bail flickered through my mind, or more heartbreakingly, had my high school sweetheart, the ghost of my past and the keeper of so many unfulfilled dreams, heard of my plight and come to my rescue. Stepping into the outside air, I was enveloped by a world that felt both familiar and impossibly distant. My eyes scanned the crowd, searching for a face from my past, clinging to the fragile hope of reconciliation. Yet, it was neither my mother nor my long-lost sweetheart who had come to claim me from the depths of my despair. Instead, standing before me was the wealthy man for whom I had worked, an unexpected savior in this chapter of my life. He revealed then with a calm clarity that after reaching out for my help once more, it was my mother who had informed him of my arrest. He explained in measured tones that he had seen the moment of my choice on his security footage. The moment I turned away from a path that could have sealed my fate in darkness. It was that choice, he said, that convinced him to pay my bail and give me this second chance. The mix of emotions that swept through me was overwhelming. Shock at his presence, relief at my release, intertwined with a poignant thread of disappointment that it was not her who had stepped into the breach. In a defining moment at an open safe, I chose integrity over theft, a decision that, remarkably, led to my freedom. Conversely, a desperate call to an old friend spiraled into my arrest. These pivotal moments underline a profound truth. Our lives are sculpted by our choices, with actions taken in moments of strength or weakness capable of drastically altering our path. Now standing free, yet engulfed by a sea of emotions, my mind wanders to her, my high school sweetheart, whose absence casts a profound shadow, linking these events in a tapestry of life's complex interplay between choices and consequences.